All right, I think we've got all of these connections. I did send the email out to the brothers. Hopefully, they'll be joining us here very shortly. Let me send an email a second time. And I'll let you know when they do log in. My apologies, but some sort of technical glitch happened today, and I could not tell. But I do see Brother Dewara has rejoined the conversation. Aquaba, welcome, Brother Dewara. You got the email link?
I did get the email link, Baba. Ubuntu Ma'at to the global LIB family. Excited to be here.
It's great to have you with us. And again, some sort of technical glitch happened. I can't tell where it was. It was odd that you and I were able to link up eventually, but Baba Junius was not able to. Hopefully, he will see the email link and join us very shortly. While we're waiting for Baba Junius to join in, have there anything's been hitting your radar this week that you wanted to bring to the table?
Oh, absolutely. It seems like this post debate time has brought a flurry of news to the world stage. And I think the first thing I'll lead with is an interesting small victory, but a victory nonetheless. This article comes from The Defender, which is part of the Children's Health Defense website. And it's dated 9/4 of this year by Suzanne Burdick. Quote, "We will not comply," end quote, "with pandemic treaty. 26 Republican governors tell the World Health Organization." And so I'm sure many of our viewers are familiar with the World Health Organization pandemic treaty, which is essentially trying to create very draconian policy worldwide, which would literally mandate uh, injections and masks for the whole entire world, thereby pretty much surpassing individual countries' governments. And that has been struck down. And so that's a win. I would say that's a small victory.
Yeah, it is a small victory, but it also indicates the overreach, the depth, and the magnitude of the globalist agenda
Right.
to take over the world using this pandemic declaration and using the idea of public health as the bait to get masses of people to bite the hook. And
Right.
let me tell you, that's rather frightening. I have read parts of it. I think there has been a bit of hyperbole over what the thing is about.
Mhm.
Nonetheless, I don't think it's at all that people would be hyperbolic about something so incredibly radical. You know, they
Right.
talk about socialists in the left and the liberal parties, etc., socialists. Well, I don't think they're socialists, but I can understand why they use that word. But it sounds to me like it is a sort of neoliberal fascism.
Mm. I think that's a much better term. Yeah, I agree.
Hmm.
It's definitely
And
fascist. That's for sure.
yeah, and in the aftermath of what we witnessed within this country and many other countries, but especially within the United States, because the response reaction to the pandemic was so out of proportion to the rest of the world, especially the developed world,
Hmm.
um, I am not at all happy with the idea that these neoliberal fascists want to, they took over the United States. They
Right.
want to take over the world now, and led, of course, by one of the worst of the neoliberal fascists, and that's Bill Gates.
Yeah, Bill Beelzebub Gates,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gates of hell.
Okay. Now let me double check, make sure our listening audience, we're not seeing Junie show up, but you did get the email link from me, correct?
I did. Correct.
Okay, I sent the email link. I also sent it via Facebook video. and Junior should be able to have that. Maybe he's having a bit of a problem on his end as well.
I did
Try and
I did notice on the email that it wasn't immediately clear that the link was for the new broadcast. Um,
Yeah, but it
so
it was attached to the previous one, so it was obviously the first one that came up, and
right.
yeah,
So
so
hopefully he gets that.
yeah, I'm sending it one more time to Baba Juniors because we do always value what he brings to the program, no doubt whatsoever.
Absolutely.
When it comes down to this, resisting what's going on from the World Health Organization and these neoliberal fascist globalists,
Hmm.
we're going to obviously have to have some sort of collective strategies. Truth apparently isn't enough because all along, a number of us, myself included, but a number of medical scientists, uh, molecular biologists, geneticists, scientists from across the whole sphere of biologics and biochemistry said that there was major problems with the way that the rollout was going on. We see in the aftermath, even insurance actuaries said that there was something terrible that happened to the working age population 18 to 54. And we see this collection of media talking about sudden cardiac arrest, increased risk of miscarriage, the appearance of something that the medical establishment doesn't want to acknowledge directly, the
Hmm.
appearance of what's called, what they call it, turbo cancer.
Turbo cancer, right? Which is just one of many uh, side effects from these experimental injections. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's also a lot of kidney problems, renal failure,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and heart issues, blood clots, as we know. So, turbo cancer is one of a long list of increasingly new side effects. And because these injections were experimental, there are new things that are coming out that doctors and scientists have never seen before. I'll try to draw up this other article in the background here of a new syndrome that has been directly linked to the CV-19 injections. And they've never seen this before. But again, when one tries to play the part of the creator by tampering with and messing with uh, arguably the creator's perfect work, then there's bound to be a ripple effect. It all seems very logical to me, but we also know that the propaganda is very heavy, and that we're groomed almost by the establishment to believe in everything that the scientists and the quote unquote medical experts say. And we've talked about before white coat syndrome or lab coat syndrome.
Yeah, it's a frightening time. There
It
is
is.
just no doubt. These people belong to a larger collective that has been claiming the world overpopulated, the world of 8.1 billion, approaching 8.2 billion. There's too many people on the planet. Now it's being projected that sometime in the next decade or so, half of all babies being born on the planet will be born on the African continent. Do you suspect that they are targeting, singling out African people for the majority of these anti-human, anti-fertility eugenics policies? And while you're speaking, I'm going to be calling Junius, Baba Junius in the background.
Hmm. Yeah, no, 120%. There are a couple of articles I saw in skimming the news last night and this morning, which talk about unregulated injections being used on the continent. We have reported before about what they call ouchless vaccines or microassay needle uh, vaccines and injections being experimented on children in Gambia and in Guinea. And then we also know that it was a direct Jeffrey Epstein connection too, who admitted, according to the phenomenal research of Whitney Webb, he admitted to experimenting on African children on the continent of Africa. And then we also know he's connected to one of the AI and robotics pioneers, Benjamin Goertzel, who has done experimentation on Ethiopian children. So yeah, absolutely, 100%. And it again goes back to something you mentioned last week, was that NSM 200 memorandum, which specifically called for eugenic policies and I believe specifically abortion to be increased and implemented in various African countries and other countries throughout the world, whose populations they claimed, Kissinger claimed, was a threat to U.S. national security. Go figure. Oh, you're muted, Baba.
Baba Juniors, we do have you in the house. Thank you for joining us today.
Question, can you hear me now?
We can
Yes,
hear you now. The microphone's a little bit low, but you are being heard. Yes.
great to
Okay.
hear you, Baba.
Yeah, it's I'm having some problems. Some of my software for the boom mic is not working. This is a USB microphone, so I don't know. The volume probably won't be that high.
No,
Yeah,
it sounds excellent right now.
yeah, sounds very good.
Okay.
Hmm.
All right. Okay.
Well, we apologize to our audience. Sometimes we have technical glitches, not only us as within our individual broadcasting station, but sometimes the overriding link to join us all together. Either I don't push enough buttons to get it all configured, or in the case of today, was some manner of a glitch. But we are back again, and happy and healthy, and great to be here with you, our listening audience. We, Baba Juniors, we got started talking about a UN mandate that Brother Dewara put on the table. Maybe you could just remind him what was the opening line you talked about sharing this proposed World Health Organization global mandate?
Sure. Basically, it's the World Health Organization, which is obviously under the direction of the UN. Their World Pandemic Treaty. And so the article that I cited was "We Will Not Comply with Pandemic Treaty. 26 Republican governors tell the WHO, World Health Organization." So apparently, for right now, anyways, it seems like that's been struck down. And apparently, the World Health Organization, who has for the past year or so been kind of battling over final revisions and drafts of this treaty, they're essentially trying to override the constitution of various countries and basically be able to dictate mandates in terms of masks and injections for the whole entire world. I'm sure you can add to that as well, Baba Junius. You might actually probably know a lot more about that than I do, but it does seem like a small victory for us at this current time.
Yeah, but see, you're absolutely right. They are attempting to override national sovereignty, but you don't expect them to give up.
Right,
They
exactly.
suffered a defeat, so they'll go back to the drawing table. And this was a treaty actually that they wanted all the nations to sign,
Mm-hmm.
and the opposition kept a fairly low key on it, but they were successful in defeating it. So just look for them to come back again. The other thing is, you mentioned the World Health Organization. Obviously, they're tools of the globalist agenda, and they have gained even more prominence. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today is that they authorized the use of the Mpox vaccine, quote unquote, they gave 100,000 doses to the Congo. And again, this is hype. Keaty covered in his book Panic, but it has just spread out even more. And the same playbook that they use for COVID, they're using for monkeypox, but they can't seem to get the traction. And I'm hoping that people will see it for what it is a scam, a total scam, and part and parcel of their eugenics agenda.
Absolutely. There's actually an article on the Defender, the Children's Health Defense website, which talks about the Mpox quote unquote vaccine being rolled out in Congo, and specifically being pushed on children, which again, this is an unregulated injection, to your point.
Yeah. Well, we are living in a precarious time. Ultimately, we're going to have to come up with some sort of strategies, individual and or collective strategies, to where we can protect ourselves from this. What options do we have on the table?
Well, one option obviously is to present information. Again, we're engaged in sentinel intelligence. We have either intuited, or we're just looking at trends in history, and we see the evil that the adversaries have in store for us. It's part and parcel, again, back to game theory, but we have identified some of the players and we're looking at their history. And so we're shouting to our people, trying to warn them of what's coming, and just hopefully that they will listen, do the research themselves, and just wake up. I know, the term woke has been overused, but we need to wake up, become conscious, become aware, do some pattern recognition, understand some historical analysis, and see what's going on, even if we don't recognize all of the major players. And the World Health Organization is, in fact, a major player in the eugenics movement, under the guise of providing health, particularly for developing countries and melanated countries.
Now, this letter, signed by 26 Republican governors, of course, represents the plurality of governors in this country. Does anybody know anything about the Democratic Party position on this World Health Organization pandemic treaty?
No, I personally don't. I'm kind of skimming the article that I mentioned, which I will put up in the private chat to be pushed. And I'm not seeing right off the bat any mention of actually. I think there were four. I think there were only four that in the Democratic Party that shot it down. But I don't have that information readily available. I saw that on.
I just found a link. You were saying, Brother Junius?
I was going to ask Dewar, was this in a committee? Was this a committee, or was it a full Senate vote? Because the Congress has to approve treaties.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I lost the article here. Hold on one second. I've got too many tabs open. I'll find it in the background here.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just share with you what I found. This is from the National Review, and it was reprinted on the Microsoft Network. The title of the article: House passes bill requiring Senate approval for World Health Organization agreements. Now, at the title, I don't know whether it's a House passing a bill favoring the treaties or just saying that the Senate is required to approve it. The story by James Lynch is 3 days old. It said the House lawmakers voted Wednesday to pass legislation giving the Senate the power to approve World Health Organization agreements as the international organization continues negotiating a global pandemic treaty in the wake of COVID-19. The House vote 219 to 199 to pass the No WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty without Senate Approval Act, with 4 Democrats joining 215 Republicans to get the bill through. So it sounds to me like the bill was passed in the House to say that there will be no approval for the treaty unless the U.S. Senate approves the treaty, which is, of course, constitutionally mandated. So it sounds to me like the 4 Democrats who joined that group were the ones who would be looked at as perhaps reluctant to drag the U.S. into this World Health Organization Global Pandemic Treaty. And then the rest of them, I think it requires us to get a tally of that vote and to identify who is the Congressional Black Caucus. There are far more than 4 members of that. Is the Congressional Black Caucus, caucus? Are they blanketly
Congressional Black Corpses?
Yeah, corpses. Thank you. That was what I was intending to say. It sounds to me like they're compliant with the World Health Organization treaty proposal. Does that sound like that to anyone else?
It makes sense given the uncritical compliance and towing the line and go along policies of most of them. Most of them also, excuse me, there's probably a financial factor because Gates has a lot of influence on the World Health Organization in terms of funding it. So I'm sure there's been some spill off and runoff on that. But unfortunately, as we've been saying all too often, our people who are in these elected positions don't do their homework, and even if they do, they often side with the quote unquote powers that be or the money grubbers.
Mm-hmm.
At the very least, I think that there's also a psychological phenomenon that I don't really hear too many people talking about, but that's kind of the age-old or a revamped version of keeping up with the Joneses. But now, it's called virtue signaling, and so people are almost herded into these thoughts and into these beliefs, which interestingly enough has replaced religion and spirit systems, and so there's this herd mentality that gets created, and one is ever conscious and cautious of not being outside of that this new quote unquote virtue circle. And so a lot of people are just going with the program because they think it's the hip, fashionable thing to do, and that's what the news is telling us to do. So that's another aspect of it as well.
I found the roll call from the U.S. House of Representatives, roll call 411, bill number HR 1425, September 11, 2024, 118th Congress, the No WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty without Senate Approval Act. It had yay votes that approved the no vote, and that was 219 versus 199 nay votes. 13 did not vote. When we're looking at voting by party, obviously the Democrats, 4 yays, 199 nays. I looked up a number of black representatives, such as, one of my favorites, Representative Barbara Lee, and I searched by last name. There were 4 Lees, and Lee might be a name particularly prone for black people. I don't know how many people name their families after Confederate generals, but when we look at Jeffries, Barbara Lee, and a couple of others that showed up, all of them Democrats voting nay, meaning that they do not think that the U.S. should not join this treaty unless the Senate approves it. So to me, that's treachery. To me, that would be a major disqualifier for me to be supportive of anything that the Democratic Party would want to do. And if the Republicans are against this treaty and vote it down, keep the U.S. out of it, then guess what? The Republican Party deserves credit for that. Isn't that true?
That's true, but again, it comes back to, are we in the game? Are we just idle, uncritical spectators? What type of pressure, what type of entreaties do we make towards our elected officials? And from my perspective, not just on this issue, but on so many issues, they're missing in action. They're just not there intellectually. They're not on top of the issues. They don't understand the ramifications as it impacts their constituents locally, but Black people in general. So again, I think we need to look at what's going on in the world, take it from a ethnocentric perspective and even a game theory perspective, and say, where are we on this issue? Where are we on this field? Are we playing defense? Are we playing offense? Are we waiting to get in the game? What is happening? Because this is a critical issue, because it means, and I don't know if, because I was trying to get on, so I don't know if Dewar explained it. This treaty means that the World Health Organization and the globalists will supersede the national sovereignty of the United States and any other countries that agree to sign on to it. And it's giving them exclusive rights in terms of dealing with quote unquote pandemics. And we've seen just how bogus these pandemics have been. Just, they were able to hit it out of the park with COVID, but a lot of the other ones, they haven't been so successful.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, which is that if this passes and if this does go through, then it can be used on virtually anything. I mean, you know, there can be mandates for the quote unquote climate crisis. There can be mandates for disinformation or misinformation regulation, which is something that, you know, the World Economic Forum has declared for 2024 is the greatest threat globally. And now another article has come out talking about Bill Gates demanding that AI should be used to censor and thwart anti-vaccination quote unquote misinformation.
Hey, Dewar, to dovetail on what you just said, there's an article, and I'm trying to find, maybe in Zero Hedge, or it may be in another, where they want to use AI to deprogram people who are resistant to the various narratives and storylines that the globalists and the power brokers are putting out there. So we can see where this is going.
Exactly. And I think I have that now. Well, at least this one is from Slay News. It says Bill Gates calls for vaccine misinformation to be censored in real time by AI. Is that the same thing you're talking about?
I don't think I saw it in Slay, but that's, yes, same thing. They didn't mention Bill Gates prominently, but they were talking about that was the policy that they wanted to pursue.
Okay, I just put that up in the private chat as well.
Okay, I'll grab that and post that up for others. I do see a few comments have come in on our Rumble page. Thank you all for being patient with us today. And Mombera, he said, greetings, brothers. Receive the link, but I'm multitasking today. Going to have to be in listener mode for right now. Hopefully, we'll stimulate his participation. He's always has something valuable to contribute. For Africa One, joining us out of the UK, Hetep Mastermind Brothers and Global LIB family. And Dwayne is in the house. Greetings. Speaking of the word, I'm not going to mention it because I am streaming today on my secondary YouTube page. But maybe, I don't know. I'm no predicting of what YouTube's going to do. Dwayne says, greetings. Speaking of your thoughts on doctors dying in a crash who were researching vaccines and turbo cancer. That was the crash that took place in Brazil. They were headed to a conference in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and it was a rather unusual crash. If you saw the plane crashing, someone had videotaped it. The plane was parallel to the ground and was slowly rotating on its horizon. Normally, planes like that go into a dive. In fact, the pilots will put the plane into a dive so that they can get air passing over the wings that would allow them to have some control over this. But as long as the plane was spinning on that platform like that and the wings were not pointed down, they could get no control over the plane. Anybody follow that one? And there were 8 doctors on the plane that were headed to a cancer conference in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Everyone on the plane perished.
But that was the week before last or last week?
I think it was within the last month.
Yeah, I saw it, but I didn't know there was a connection with doctors attending this conference. I just saw a plane crash, and the reason I thought about it was because the Eagles were getting ready to go there to play in a football game. But I'm not surprised. I mean, it remains to be seen if their authorities there do a search like the National Transportation Safety Board does here or the FAA does here to determine what went wrong. And that whole thing will probably be sucked down the memory hole and we'll forget all about it.
Right. Yeah.
I found a link to that. I'll post that link up for everybody. This from CTV News. Their job was saving lives. They lost their own in Brazil's horrifying plane crash. I'll put that link up in case anybody wants to find out more about that story.
Yeah,
You were saying, Dwara?
No, I was just saying that I was unfamiliar with that story. I'll have to look that up in the background. But yeah, not surprising to Baba Junius's point.
Well, hopefully things will transform, things will change. I'm quite pessimistic. I see the I see the formation of 2 major global conflicts on this planet. I think I told you about my analysis called Disaster Preparedness for World Wars 5 and 6. That I see what we're talking about right now is World War 5. That we're seeing the weapons of war, including economic war, propaganda war, cyber warfare, and quite likely biological warfare or biochemical warfare being rolled out on a global basis, political warfare. And at the same time, you were saying, I'm sorry?
No, I'm sorry. I cut you off. I was just interjecting with cognitive warfare as well, what they're calling.
Yeah. That's mind war. You're absolutely right. Yeah. But I see those being rolled out on a global basis over these ideas of public health policy going wrong. And it's similarly, when we look at the NATO versus BRICS front line, it appears from my observances that one is moving ever so closer and closer into deeper engagement, because they've been shooting for 2 years now, but moving towards deeper conflict now with the deployment of long-range missiles to Ukraine to strike at the heart of the Russian Republic. And despite warning after warning after warning from the Russian leadership, and not just Putin, it's the whole leadership, that NATO is playing a very dangerous game of nuclear, what they call it, saber rattling.
Right, or nuclear chicken.
Nuclear chicken, yeah. And I don't know. I have a number of opinions on it. I think that the Ukrainians are just being used as cannon fodder in a proxy war by the Western powers to try and remove military capacity from Russia, as they also, on the other front of World War VI, trying to remove economic hegemony, economic momentum from China.
Yeah, I one of the things I wanted to talk about was President Putin announced that there are 34 countries have expressed interest in joining BRICS, according to Putin. So again, that notice that I've been talking about for years, and I call it the world is taking sides.
Hmm.
That side choosing, it's just like almost like a pickup game, and looking at the, the on the field or the court, and we're talking about game theory. Well, more and
Mm-hmm.
more people want to play on the brick side because they see what's
Mm-hmm.
coming, and so I agree with you that the major casualties, or what they would callously call collateral damage, is the Ukrainian people because they're being devastated. And to show you what's going on, 2 weeks ago there was a major Russian missile attack on a building, this military academy. And the
Mm-hmm.
academy was the building they were using to house the NATO trainers or the logistics people who were training the Ukrainians how to use the jets and some of this other sophisticated equipment. So that was Russia's response, because this was after the Ukrainians had attacked several sites within the Russian territory.
Yeah, and the Kirk's
And
reason. Mm-hmm.
well, but they also attacked. They sent some drones to Moscow.
Yeah, that's true.
So what we're seeing, and because of the blackout, suppression, and censorship, we're seeing World War VI fully engaged. And we have to get out of the box, move beyond the box of us thinking that it's going to be quote unquote conventional, or that it was going to be like World War I or World War II. It's entirely different, namely because of the technology and because of the players in the game. So we're fully engaged, and it just hasn't gotten to the point where uh, we're getting warnings of the incoming missiles heading to the United States yet.
Yeah, and when we talk about what is war, what defines war, it's not just fire and steel.
Hmm.
Economic warfare,
Yeah.
propaganda warfare, it's always the first weapon deployed in war.
Hmm.
Cyber warfare, information warfare, or psyops, psychological operations. When we look at the various, and we could almost include um, bio warfare
Hmm.
when it comes to these alignments as well. So things are getting a little hairy. From a Pan African perspective, is it possible that Pan Africans could carve out a position for themselves by which they can be non aligned and perhaps escape this conflagration that we see looming on the horizon?
Well, to answer your question, where are the commentaries about what Duara was talking about? Where are the commentaries about World Health Organization ramping up their campaigns to vaccinate more and more African people over something that's totally bogus? The monkeypox is totally bogus. I'm not saying that there's not some virus out there or something that impacts people's skin or whatever, but looking at the numbers, and let's look at the numbers. The African continent is home to 1.5 billion people, latest accounts.
Yeah,
One-
1.521 to be up to the week. Mhm.
Right. So when you're looking at the numbers uh, from the propaganda and the fear porn, they're making it seem like this is a major problem. And so you only talk about 17,000 people and a couple of hundred deaths, and I'm not minimizing death and transition.
Hmm.
What I'm saying is just look at the numbers, number one, and number two, we need to think in terms of death is inevitable, it's unavoidable. The question is, how and when do you go out?
Right.
That's
So
right.
we need to not fall for the okie doke, the flim flam.
What I've also seen is that Mpox has the markers of it being gain of function, and that article, I'll try to draw that up in the background. But I think Dr. Drew was talking about that as well.
Yeah, but see, what we don't hear is the fact that they've made a transition like they do, because this is an ongoing propaganda war.
Mhm.
Initially, monkeypox was a homosexual consequence,
Right. That's
a
absolutely right.
consequence of homosexuality. You don't hear that anymore. They're just using it. And I believe, like you just said, that they have rebranded something else and they're calling it monkeypox because they don't want to trip and fall again like they did the first time, because people say, oh, well, that's just a gay, it's just a gay thing.
Right. Now, there's almost like a double agenda there, and I'm trying to pull up my notes on that from a couple of weeks ago. It's almost like a double agenda because to say that that Mpox was essentially came from African homosexuals, you know, they're almost trying to hit two birds with one stone in that type of propaganda.
Yeah, but you
Mm.
look at the propaganda. Think back or start to do some research, and
Hmm.
hopefully they haven't scrubbed it. But
Hmm.
look at what they said. The Europeans who contracted it were in Africa, and they were admittedly homosexuals who had engaged in multiple partners.
Mm.
So that was, I think, the killer for that monkeypox being the new COVID.
Mm.
But again, you have the question: is it gain of function, and is it just more and more fear porn to push more and more people toward this notion that the world is beset by pathogens, viruses, and all kinds of germs and what have you, to promote the World Health Organization agenda? Because if you look at what we're bombarded with on a daily basis,
Hmm.
you never hear them talk about the wonders of the human immune system. We're
Right.
always talking about how it's been compromised, or how it's not functioning, or they try to ignore it altogether.
And that speaks directly to their worship of scientism and their disconnection from the cosmos, the universe, the creator, the divine mystery, whatever name you want to attribute to it. Their despiritualized thought process bypasses the perfection, if you will, of the human body and its capability to heal itself. And instead, they rebrand it as Yuval Harari. That man, I want to spit every time I hear his name. Him being
Hmm.
a personal advisor for Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, he has reduced us to being hackable animals. His quote.
Right, right, right.
And then it's almost like a triple threat now that I'm thinking about it, because you have the whole homosexual claim and you're tying that to Africa. And then you're also, they say it originated in Congo. What a big coincidence there that, so many of the precious metals and rare minerals that are needed for this space technology and military technology is also coming from Congo. So, I mean that in and of itself seems like a triple-headed propaganda campaign.
Well,
And then
don't forget AIDS. That whole
exactly
Well, I was going to say what you're describing sounds like AIDS 3.0.
3.0, exactly. And then I was up on Reuters a couple of weeks ago, and for everything about mpox, they have a picture of a needle or a vaccine, and so that's the little thumbnail image that is attributed to almost every story on mpox, and those stories dominate when you click on the Africa tab. And so part of that is also the psychological warfare on us to automatically associate this quote unquote life-saving, although experimental, vaccine with mpox. And yeah, it's we're living in some crazy times.
Yeah. And we welcome you, our listening audience, to join the conversation today. Sorry to my Rumble family. I just noticed that we were having a frozen screen there, but we unfrozen. Thanks for being patient today. A lot of things putting on the table. Yes.
Do you, I mean, stuff happens in life,
Mm-hmm.
but given that what has transpired, particularly up to this weekend, do you think this just coincidental that you're having problems given all the potentiality of discussions that we could talk about that would expose what's going on in the world?
One must keep one's mind open to all kind of possibilities, while at the same time we try to stay outside of the realm of paranoia that becomes self-limiting. So, yes, but at the same time, we cannot allow fear of restriction, repression to encourage us or to motivate us, to stimulate us to self-regulation.
Right. Well,
Sometimes,
but we've seen this. What you're talking about now, you've seen the actualization of that. You had an
oh yeah,
issue and you resolved it.
hmm
So I'm asking our listeners and our viewers to see this as a teachable moment,
that's
to
right.
see this as a life lesson. So
That's
even
right.
if this is in fact what has happened,
hmm
hey, we're still here. As Dick Gregory said, "Ha, you missed."
As Peter Tosh says, pick myself up, dust myself up off, and start all over again.
Hmm.
And that's
Get
what we
knocked
do.
down,
We are resilient.
right? Get knocked down 9 times and get up 10.
There you go. There you go. That's the way to go. There was a question that came in to the Rumble page from Dwayne. He asked also, while on topic of health, your thoughts on vibration plates. Anybody familiar with this idea of vibration plates?
What are they?
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with that.
Okay, I looked up vibration plates. Livestrong has a following. Is vibration exercise a scam? Question mark. And this one, it talks about vibrate your way to a slimmer, fitter you. Just strap yourself to a piece of equipment, turn it on, and watch your body be transformed. But does it work? Considering vibration plate exercise machines can be costly, around $1,500 or so, it's wise to find out before you buy whether or not they are a scam. So it's not an outright scam. The idea of stimulating movement through the feet and the lower legs as a form of exercise is not a scam. Yet at the same time, it's so expensive that to me it borders on scam. If you're talking about $1,500 to stand on a plate, it makes you go like that. And I couldn't endorse that. I would endorse, and it's a lot less expensive, doing some deep knee crunches, deep knee bends, crunches. I have an exercise that I do that eliminates edema, the swelling in the lower parts of our legs, so that we become puffy and our feet swell up and our shoes don't fit anymore. I just do, you're supposed to do about 30 of them. I actually do 100, where you just lying flat on your back and you stretch your toes all the way out and you bring them all the way back. I do 100 of those, and at the end of 100, it's quite painful because the lactic acid starts to build up.
Hmm.
But the edema goes down. I noticed it was disappearing in about 4 days, and I was surprised that I had edema, swelling of the feet, but it's gone now. And so I use that routine. Toe stretches. If you're standing in the line at the post office or the grocery store, why not just do toe stretches? Stand up on your toes and exercise your lower legs. Keeps the nervous system tuned up, keeps the oxygen flowing, and of course, keeps your legs toned up and helps us to manage our weight.
But again, you touched on it that there is validity to vibrations. It's just that this mechanism is being used and misdirected.
It's been
Vibrations,
highly commercialized.
right, and corrupted. So the brother who asked the question realized that vibrations are real. They're
Hmm.
around us, all kinds of frequencies around us.
Mhm.
I thought you were going to talk about reflexology or something like to that effect, or to just take off your shoes and stand on the ground, on natural ground.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Just
called
Grounding.
grounding.
grounding,
Hmm.
Perfect.
yes.
Yep.
So vibrations are real, but the most important vibrations are the ones that you generate yourself with your own thoughts.
Mm.
That's right.
And
And what I saw about vibration plates, the most important vibration was that vibration that removes cash out of your bank account and vibrates it into those who sold it to you.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Hence the word currency, right?
yeah.
If I can chime in on the moral aspect, you know, the other thing that we have to be aware of is that part of the cultural cancer that we have inherited from Yoruba is thinking that if it's easy, then it's better. Our
Mm,
ancestors were inextricably clear that pain and hard work are prerequisites to obtaining anything worth having. And I think we have a very skewed understanding of pain. And that's something that I've done a lot of research on the last 4 or 5 years is what is the indigenous African interpretation of pain? And pain is unavoidable, but and I know Baba Junius has pointed out so eloquently before that pain and hardship and adversity is an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to acquire more wisdom that can be applied to the future. We have to be very careful, in short, of adopting these foreign alien cultural mindsets that just because it's easy, it's therefore better. I'm not against things or technologies making things slightly easier, but when we completely disregard the diligence and diligence as a virtue held so high by our ancestors, that hard work is necessary to achieve uh, everything that's worth having, and pain is a huge part of that.
mm-hmm.
No pain, no
All right.
gain. You know.
One of the
Yeah.
things I want, again, it's about getting back to our indigenous roots. And I saw something the other day, and they were talking about demoralization, but they framed it differently. They weren't talking about being discouraged. They were talking about the real meaning of the word, where your moral compass, your
Mm.
moral values, and your moral foundation is destroyed or crumbled. And that's what we're seeing in this country today. And that process leads to discouragement. It can lead to nihilism. It can lead to major depression and people just giving up. And I think the solution is to reaffirm what you believe in, or to rediscover what our ancestors believed in and what they knew and understood for certain. Nowadays is called indigenous knowledge systems,
Mm-hmm.
indigenous science, alchemy, whatever name folks want to give it. We need to, again, what I call the Sankofa initiative, return to that, because we cannot depend on a strictly materialistic and exploitative system to have our best interests at heart.
I think
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. Getting back to that indigenous wisdom is important, and we've been disconnected from it, and so a lot of us are not even aware of what that means. One of the things I listed as an insight that I had this week is that too many of us have exotic identities. You know, I know a lot of younger people that are claiming to be indigenous Americans instead of Africans, and I've talked about that before, at how Pan Africanism amongst younger people, at least in my personal experience, is almost out of vogue at this point, and now being an indigenous American is a big identity. But with that being said, uh, we still have Eurasian values, and that seems to be lost amongst the young people that I deal with. Um, you know, they have a plethora of identity options. You know, are you a Black Hebrew Israelite this week, or are you part of the Nation of Gods and Earths? You know, are you an African descendant of slaves, quote unquote? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but our values are still the same. You know, we're cussing up a storm. The respect for elders has been lost. You know, promiscuity is running rampant, and it's like we've been indoctrinated. You know, by these thoughts of hedonism and these actions of hedonism. And so, getting back to the practices that our ancestors did, I think that's highly important for our people to take a look at.
To what extent is this over manipulation and this channeling of people into these uh, pathways, such as unconscious crass consumerism and
Mhm.
social media reaction? We have these influencers now taking a disproportionate impact over the shaping of society. To what extent could this be aligned with such a high growth of population across the planet, especially high growth of population within the most developed economies and most advanced economies, that they're kind of run out of ways to get practical about living. And so now they're just kind of synthesizing all of these identities.
But it's all part of menticide, the mind control, the deliberate destruction of a people's mind.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great things about the mind, and we look at humanity and you look at some of the great things that we have created in the past, meaning indigenous people, aboriginal people, we had a sense of meaning about
Mhm.
life.
Yeah, Shay.
That has been taken away. And so what you're saying, this synthesizing of life, or this make believe life, or this amalgamation where materialism, hedonism, uh, recklessness, and irresponsibility have pushed down Ma'at, have pushed down Ubuntu, have pushed down good character.
Mm-hmm.
And we are seeing the resulting results and or consequences, and it's mainly because of the advent of the technology that we have now, where they
Mhm.
can reach
Mm-hmm.
just about anybody, anywhere, anytime on this planet.
I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Are either of you familiar with the subculture called incel, INCEL?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah. Would you like to describe for the
Not
listening audience that
me.
may be unfamiliar with the term?
Well, I'm unfamiliar with someone's gonna have to
Sure.
explain what it means to me.
So, is as far as I understand, incel is short for involuntary celibate,
Mm-hmm.
and it includes uh, men, including young men, but men in general, who maybe don't fit the uh, the handsome or beauty standards as set forth by, I don't want to go too deep here, but we'll put it like this: that I'll give you the street version of what I think a voluntary involuntary celibate in incel is a man that is maybe still living in his mom's basement, is having trouble kind of get weaning himself off video games, and he's angry, he's frustrated that women are not attracted to him, and actually there's been a connection between incels and active attack events and mass shooters. So
Yeah,
that's
active
pretty special.
shooters incidences. That's right. There is actually a web presence for incels. It's a huge subculture.
Mm.
And I put up a link in the chat and on the Rumble chat to incels.wiki. They have their own wiki community. I mean, it's huge. And they have these different categories: general information, the broader scope, talking about the manosphere. It's global. Their books, comics, movies, all of these kind of documentation of themselves as a social phenomena. And then there are probably about 13 or 15 different theories related to this. A lot of it has to do with the impact of social media, obviously, the impact of video game culture, the increasing isolation of those of the millennial generation, now Generation Y, I think it is, that followed the millennials, or Generation Z, that these involuntary celebrates are losing their ability at social skills, at talking to people, at relating to other people. We have seen this rise in Japan and South Korea over the last decade or so, to the point where those nations now, their population momentum ran out. And Singapore, another one, their population momentum ran out. Now, Japan, you can watch on Worldometer, you can watch Japan's population decline. Every few seconds, they subtract another member from the population. Meanwhile, for the African continent, you're going to see the population growing by several every second. So, this whole incel culture, to me, I see it as particularly threatening, and it reminds me of the movie The Matrix, where people were living in an artificial reality, or assumed an artificial reality, and by which in the movie The Matrix, ultimately their bodies were being controlled in these little pods and these cells as an energy source. And I see so many people who are thrust and cast into this artificial reality, social media manipulation, whole lifestyle, are being used as batteries.
Mm. Mm.
Well,
And
or sources for harvesting, not just energy, but other things.
Hmm.
And you talked about social isolation. What was the defining uh, uh, modality for the COVID experience? What did they say? In a second only to vaccination, what were they pushing for as a means of solving the problem?
Social
lockdown.
isolation, distancing.
Social lockdown,
Yeah.
social isolation, disconnecting, when our
Yeah.
history as beings on this planet,
Hmm.
first on the spiritual level, being connected with the spirit, that pervades the whole universe, then being connected with each other with Ubuntu, they have short circuited and undermined that. And that's why the depression is so high. You mentioned social relationships, social awareness, studies by prominent psychologists that are being suppressed are saying that young people who are caught up in social media, particularly the younger people, are losing the ability to relate to each other,
Yeah.
hold meaningful conversations, recognize the whole issue about body language and eye contact and
Right.
speaking to people and in a social setting. And again, and they know this is happening. They knew that was going to be a consequence of their policies. Because I've seen
Hmm.
studies from Johns Hopkins just talking about things like that prior to the pandemic.
Right. And then if we go to the continent with it, we can see the reverse of what we're experiencing here, meaning on the continent, gender roles are clearly defined. No one is isolated. Isolation is worse than death to a continental African. Um,
And,
everyone
and it's a form of ostracization. People who are
right,
who isolate themselves are either banned because they've been banished from the community,
right.
or a lot of times they ascribe that to maladaptive or malicious thoughts and behavior, almost like a witch or a sorcerer or something.
Absolutely. There's even a symbolic metaphor for that, and that's that someone who chooses isolation and refuses communalism is seen as an unpollinated grain stalk. Another one also is a rolled up sitting mat. So the metaphor becomes a sitting mat that is unrolled is usable by other people. It's functional. It has a purpose. But a sitting mat that is always rolled up and that is never used is one of the many metaphors on the continent, and I believe it's a Luo metaphor uh, in modern day Kenya for demonizing and socially ostracizing, to your point, people who are viewed as antisocial.
Hmm. Under the various theories related to the whole incel community is one called the behavioral sink. This is a new term to me. Let me just briefly describe it. You tell me, does this seem to be one of those kind of aha interpretations of what we're witnessing? Just quickly, less than two paragraphs or two paragraphs. The behavioral sink is a term coined by American behavioral researcher John B. Calhoun, referring to an abrupt population collapse in extremely mild environments. Calhoun conducted a series of experiments with mice and rats, etc. Calhoun's explanation for the outcome of his experiment, in which his experiments, some of which resulted in such population collapses. His explanation for the outcome of his experiments was that overpopulation leads to social hierarchies where there was more demand for social roles than could be reasonably filled. He claimed the ensuing physiological strain, this harsh competition for limited social roles put on the mice subjected to these conditions, resulted in the emergence of, quote, autistic like creatures,
Mm.
capable only of the most simple behaviors compatible with physiological survival, unquote, eventually leading to the breakdown of all normal social behavior, with this often resulting in the auto extinction of the rodent colonies in question. Wow. I related to a few statements inside of that. Any thoughts?
Well, he talks about overpopulation in the history of the world. Uh, and he said, I wrote, overpopulation leads to social hierarchies. Well, that's a natural progression in the sense that, and I'm talking from an Ubuntu perspective and a
Mhm.
Ma'at perspective. Yes, there's going to be leaders. There's going to be people who take initiative, but that doesn't mean that they're going to exploit people and exploit the group or brutalize or take advantage of the group. It's more a position or an option towards social control. Now, when you talk about Urugu, that's a whole different
Right,
ball. But
right,
you talk a collapse of society where there when societies collapse, there are external forces at work, and there are also psychological and emotional and spiritual forces at work. And I'm saying that this collapse that we're seeing is not necessarily organic. It's being orchestrated by
Hmm.
external forces or
Hmm.
forces, a fifth column here in this country, or people, uh, Judas goats in our community. We talked about what's his name, Calvin Broadus, Snoop Dogg, or we
Hmm.
talked about a whole lot of those. It gave a whole lot of examples of those last week. So there are a lot of things that work here, and unfortunately, most of us are so comatose and so somnambulant, even walking around like zombies. We're not even aware of what's going on.
I
Hmm.
meant I mentioned a minute ago that traditionally on the continent, everybody has a role to play. And I was reading something about how in Yoruba land, right, one of the proudest, most dignified people in the whole entire town, in this one town in Yoruba land, Nigeria, was the man who fetches hay for the Oba or the king for his horses. And he had such a dignified and proud role. People looked up to him, people respected him because he was the best at his job. And so there is also this we're seeing with Yurugu, everyone wants to be a celebrity, everyone wants to be a star. And so a lot of these incels, I would argue, um, are connected to these mass shootings and things because that is the only avenue that society allows them to gain any type of popularity or fame. What a horrible thing. Whereas the converse of that is that on the continent, even the one that fetches hay for the king's horse is dignified and as seen as a respectable and highly valued person. Everyone plays a role. So I think
Hmm.
culture is a huge factor. Culture is a huge factor. Not to mention that last point, Baba Junius talks about it not just being one thing. It's not just isolation. It's our removal from nature here. It's our removal from communalism. It's our removal from having any type of socially reinforced virtues and values, morals and ethics. All of that contributes. And then you propagate someone with 24/7 access to violence, degeneracy, and other types of propaganda, sexual deviance, and it's no wonder. And then you flip the gender roles as well. It's no wonder that suicide is at an all-time high rate, especially amongst men and teenage or excuse me, preteen young girls. They've completely disrupted the natural order, and that's why in thinking about Pan Africanism, we also need to be Pan Africanism in our daily practices as well. It's not just a political label, which you so eloquently break down, Baba Kiti, in your various reports. Being a functional Pan Africanism, not just someone that wears a pin of Amilcar
Hmm.
Cabral or Kwame Nkrumah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sorry for the tirade.
No, no, that was very welcome tirade. I was reading through this research from John B. Calhoun about the behavioral sink, and a couple of points in summarizing his research I think are relevant. Just to a few of the points that he makes near the end of this particular document, they talk about some of these outcomes of these behavioral sinks, one being gangs. Some male rodents, and again, his experiments were on rodents, some male rodents also formed marauding gangs, attacking any female and young rodents that they came into proximity with. Males engaged in sporadic acts of violence. Point two, population decline. With the lack of territory normally established by males, the females also reproduced less, neglected their offspring, and cared for their offspring on their own particularly or partly overtaking male tasks of maintaining territory and demonstrating aggression. Conclusion: the experiments that resulted in such a behavioral sink ended in the extinction of the colony due to all males and females having become uninterested in reproduction.
Mm.
However, the behavioral sink was not the outcome of all experiments. Example given: when food was supplied in a manner where it could be consumed in a way that did not tend to incite male competition. So interesting, because we understand that people conduct these rat studies, social psychological rat studies, in order to see if these do apply to instances where human behavior is involved. And from what I read right there, it does kind of fit my model of what we're witnessing with the incel community, this young generation, the children of the millennials, that we're now seeing disconnected and disinterested in replicating the species. We saw, even amongst the millennials and older generations, significant number of women changing their, radically shifting their behaviors away from motherhood and child rearing to uh, woman on woman alignment, women on women marrying. It also to women going, committing fully to the workplace and thereby being so stressed out that it's hard for them to have another life where the nurturing element comes fully to the front, as well as the number of women, and we're increasingly seeing men latching onto pets, onto puppies and dogs and cats and pets as
Yeah.
surrogate children.
Yeah, the and there's a whole infantile and juvenility about, having your pet in a little stroller. I mean, eh, that touches quickly upon two articles that I also wanted to mention. One is from New York Times, dated 9/11 of this year. Parenting has always been hard. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, that the Yurugu mindset, the Yurugu cultural mindset is that if it's hard, it's evil, it's no good. And some sort of technology should be invented so that pain does not need to be experienced, and it doesn't have to be hard. But in reality, again, everything worth having is hard and demands work. So that's part of the propaganda for depopulation there as well. And then I'm going to buttress that with one more article, uh, which says that almost 1 in 4 millennials and Generation Zers say that they won't have kids due to finances. But they also mentioned in that article, they kind of snuck this in here, is that one of the other main reasons besides finances, which they pointed out, is the loss of personal freedom. That goes back to that rugged individualism. That goes back to the non-communalism. That goes back to essentially the hedonistic mindset. Because what is LGBT and promiscuity? It is pleasure without responsibility.
Mm.
TD, the thing that we forget is experiments like the one that Calhoun conducted is a form of social re-engineering on the rodents. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, he's putting them in artificially created situations that oftentimes last over generations, and he watches the consequences and the results of that. And that's
That's
what
right.
we're seeing here in this country. There's nothing wrong, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing malicious about social engineering. Our ancestors uh, just exalted social engineering, particularly along the Nile Valley, to the
Mm-hmm.
point that they had civilizations that lasted for thousands and thousands of years
Right.
and was able to transcend and bounce back to declines and invasions and things like that. So I'm not talking about what I'm talking about is social re-engineering, where the Asili of Urugu is the norm, and that's what's being superimposed on the world. And that's what you
Mm,
see in those experiments where this guy superimposes conditions on these animals that disrupt their normal relationships, their normal activities, and their normal responses to life.
hmm
That's
Yeah,
a great
putting
point.
them in an artificial and confining environment just to observe when will the disruptive patterns of behavior emerge. And within these rat experiments, and I was just kind of reading through, there was one group they called the probers. They were talking about all these maladaptive behaviors that eventually came to the surface and were identified. The probers, some rodent cells, alternatively became hypersexual and either engaged in homosexual behaviors or incessantly chased female rodents in estrus. These were dubbed probers by Calhoun in spite of being defeated and chased away by the dominant rodents. And so that does sound like a certain set of the male population, hypersex, being addicted to pornography, and of course, becoming hypersex. And then if there are no females in estrus, meaning in their fertility around, they would just find another prober and probe each other.
It reminds me of one of the more literal translations of the declarations of innocence, or what I like to call the declarations of purity of Ma'at. And one of those is, I have not penetrated the penetrator. And
Mm,
so, yeah, it sounds like that's in line with the comedic uh, outspokenness of the backwardness of homosexuality, where the prober probes the prober.
mm. Well,
The interesting thing is that the term that you use, maladaptive behaviors, if you're familiar with Dr. Amos Wilson, he uses that term, but he
mm-hmm,
explains the reasons for the quote unquote maladaptive behavior. And he challenges Western psychology, Western law, Western social organization by saying that these maladaptive behaviors on the part of Black people are the result of the violence that these social engineers have imposed upon Black people to
mm-hmm.
destroy the social engineering, our own indigenous social engineering.
Is it not just kind of maybe sometimes I like to try to break things down to their simplest element. Is it not that we're just being reduced to deplorable animals that are I mean, I think it might even be below animals, because at least animals act on instinct. I think Baba Bianchi back in the day said something like, some of these giraffes are doing a better job at raising their children than we are, you know? They lick
Mm-hmm.
them, they lick them and keep them safe, and prod them with their noses to make sure that they're able to walk and whatnot. But when we're put in these situations, like many of these rats and mice are, we neglect we neglect all instinct, we neglect all wisdom, we neglect all uh, natural order.
Yeah, but that's the key to understanding these controlled environments.
Hmm.
They studied rats in terms of tight uh, living conditions, and they projected that on Black folks living in these housing projects. And what I'm saying is that, and I agree with you, we are guinea pigs. We're being experimented on. The goal is not just to study us
Mm.
and study what happens in these maladaptive social situations. The goal is to transform us in a not in a transcendent fashion, but in a debasement fashion,
Right.
to the point that we abandon our basic law of survival. We abandon our basic instincts, because we do have instincts. And
Hmm.
the instinct is to tap into our life's energy and our life force. And they want to do away with that, our very recognition of a life force. And when we talked earlier in the program about the immune system, the immune system is a part of the divine intelligence that resides within each and every one of us.
Hmm.
They are trying to make us totally uh, disconnected and have amnesia about that whole piece. And so, again, it gets back to the wider uh, definition of being demoralized and
Let me ask you.
dispirited.
Let me ask you this, based upon what you just stated. What percentage, what should be of the population should be expected to rebel against this gross manipulation? I mean, realistically, we would think that 99% of the people would rebel against such manipulation. But the reality is we may have the 99% movement, but then at the end of the day, those 99 percenters that were out in the streets rebelling against the concentration of wealth and income and manipulation of the global order, they are going to go home and have a meal.
Mm.
And quite likely, the meal that they're going to be engaging in is feeding the very same beast that they were just in rebellion against.
Well, keep in mind, the group, the original group of mice, rats, or humans do rebel.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that they watch the level of resistance and rebellion, and they apply appropriate pressure and to disrupt them. So
Mm-hmm.
then they look not only at that generation, but they look at the next and successive generations. So the maladaption that we see in our communities is not a single generation response.
Mm-hmm.
We're responding over trans generations. And unfortunately, one of the things that we talked about, we need to look at reinforcement, reward, and recognition. That's what they do, and that's how they get many of these subsequent generation to go along with their program. Meaning the Sambo and Uncle Tom, so he becomes the overseer that's just as brutal or more brutal than the European overseer. And
Mm-hmm.
we mentioned it in terms with these elected officials who are so out of it and so treacherous that for the sake of a salary or a position, they've turned their back, not only turned their backs on us, but they're working actively to destabilize us and to force us into even greater maladaptive behaviors. And I'll give you an example. We look at the killings, the homicides, the home invasions, and all of that that's going on in our community. And there are people out there who said, defund the police.
Hmm.
Mm.
And here we are, because we don't have the fruit of Islam, we don't have the deacons of justice for justice and defense, we don't have Garvey's African legions to
Hmm.
defend us in our community. We don't even have that consciousness anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's what they're watching, and they're saying, okay, things are working out. And the more rewards, the more reinforcement we give, the worse these problems, or the more maladaptive these people, these animals are going to become. And
I
that's
mean,
their
Yeah.
ultimate goal.
is that not exactly what it seems like the transgender phenomenon is the a lot of these connecting it to incels, a lot of them are mediocre or average in competition with other men, but when they quote unquote magically become women, which we know is really gender appropriation, um, they then excel, right? Because they're facing women, and ultimately they find their time in the spotlight, so to speak. Is that not the same type of phenomenon?
Well, I
Sure.
can definitely see a correlation there that significant number of these incels, involuntary celibates, who don't want to be incels, they want to be the chads, the hypersexualized. Well, you don't have a chance of being a chad, but if you put some breasts on, put on a wig or allow your hair to grow long and silky and take estrogen conforming chemical injections over a period of time, you get a chance to be hypersexualized, but not as a Chad, but as Chadine.
That Shadeen. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say, look at RuPaul, for example.
Mm,
25, 30 years ago, he was forced to be in the closet. He
yeah.
was out there. People knew he was out there. But look at the mainstream acceptance of him and his ilk today.
The mainstream promotion or acceptance?
Well, acceptance is based on promotion. In
That's
other
right.
words, this is not organic. It's not just millions of people wake up in the morning
Right.
and say, "Oh, well, let's be more tolerant. Let's be more accepting of RuPaul."
Right.
He's being promoted, and he gets rewarded, and
Yeah.
he gets recognition, and that's what I'm saying. One of the driving forces for social change and change, because from my perspective, human beings change for two reasons mainly: external pressure, which could be uh, coercion, and then punishment or reward or uh, enrichment, or the other reason is self-enlightenment. You have the aha moment, or you have
Mm.
a inspiration where somebody comes up with something. You have the Imhotep who comes up with all these great ideas because he's in in deep connection with the divine spirit that's within him. Otherwise, you're just out there.
And
But if
that's
you
Let me
want
ask this.
change, go ahead.
Let me ask this question. Rather radical question. Is the RuPaul phenomenon, not just that individual, but the RuPaul phenomenon of gender dysphoria, is it good for American men, Western men?
No, because it creates, not only is it dysphoria, it creates confusion, and it disrupts the natural order, and it also creates social instability and confusion. Now, once it becomes, see, we haven't gotten to the point where it is totally accepted and embraced, and everybody's doing it, which is their goal. That's why they're having
Mhm.
these programs and stuff with the kids in elementary school.
Right.
So it remains to be seen just how far they're going to go before the total collapse of society. And it won't be too, because of the technology, it'll be very rapid.
Hmm.
I'll say real
Dwyer,
quick.
did you want to respond to that same question?
Yeah, absolutely. In brief, I'll say that it is inherently bad because it's anti ma'at in the sense that it has us believing in superstition and in illusion, and therefore promoting falsity as truthhood, which is an abomination uh, in
Hmm.
indigenous African culture.
I'm going to disagree with you, brothers. And the reason I'm going to disagree is because I'm putting my feet firmly down on a foundation called game theory. From a Pan African perspective, having to compete in this world against competitive, powerful civilizations,
I say,
from my perspective at winning the game, then the sissification of the males of our major competitors for the future is a good thing for my team. Your thought?
I think the only problem with that, and
Mm-hmm.
I see where you're going, and I don't disagree. It's just I think I think a couple of weeks ago you quoted that the number one statistic that is on the rise for this type of maladaptive behavior is young black women. So who's being disproportionately affected the most? Is if it's our people, then it's backfiring on us.
Yeah, I was going to
Hmm.
say the reason
Good point.
I disagree is that it's not an isolated phenomenon just in the other groups. If it was just the Chinese or just the Europeans or the Ashkenazim and
Mhm.
not us, I'd say, yeah, okay, I agree. But when you look at what's happening in our community
Right.
and it's part of the disempowerment in our community, I can't see that it's benefiting when you have so many on a disproportional level, the numbers.
Uh-huh. Of course, because it's happening to African people in the diaspora countries, mainly US, UK, France, and these other developed countries, Germany, etc. But it is not happening to any great extent on the African continent.
Right.
Then, and I think I may have heard Khalid Abdul Muhammad or something make this point, is that these sissies are undercover warriors for the black cause, sacrificing themselves on the front line, converting as many as possible of the Urugu's would-be soldiers, converting as many as possible of them into becoming sissies. And so, based upon our global demographics, we can take the hits, no pun intended.
Mm.
Well, stop and
Now,
think.
that sounds like a real cynical position, but I think there is some core of truth in game theory that we may have to sacrifice some of our own to take out even more of theirs.
All right, but keep in mind the game theory. So look at what, just say what we talked about last week with the African Leaders Conference that took place in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Look at some of the policy recommendations, or reading between those lines, what we see that the Westerners want to do. They want to crack down and break the barriers, the cultural barriers that the Africans have put up against homosexuality, the LGBTQ plus community, and they're tying it with aid and so-called modernity. And so it's not like Africans are not under assault on the
Mhm.
continent,
Right.
that they're not going to be exposed to the depravity that the diasporan brethren experience on a daily basis, particularly when they use the whole thing of if they can get somebody to buy into it. And I understand what Khalid Muhammad was talking about, but I'm saying that's going to be done to us. And then with the reinforcement, the reward, and the recognition factor, it could blow up in our faces in terms of, okay, these people were sacrificed. No, the enemy used them, and now they're becoming more influential. For example, look at the influence of hip hop and negative hip hop around the world, and particularly what's happening in Africa with the Afro beats and some of their artists. Um, just again, that reward and the recognition, as opposed to somebody, a righteous warrior like Bob Marley.
Yeah. The term unwitting or unknowing agent of the Matrix comes to mind. In that, I'll give two quick examples. One is how Euro-American feminists influence African American feminists, and now African American feminists are trying to make entryism in influencing continental African women, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's one example. The other example that I want to give is that it works in the reverse too. I'm thinking of the crack epidemic, right? And how that was a form of chemical warfare waged upon our people, and yet that ended up blowing up in Urugu's face because ultimately it started to spread to the suburbs, And then as soon as white people started to get a hold of it, and I'm thinking of counties outside of Miami specifically, is I think one documentary I saw, and that kind of blew up in their face. And I'm wondering even if there's a causal connection between that and now the opioid epidemic, which is, I mean, completely disproportionately here in the Northeast, anyways, completely disproportionately affecting white people and specifically suburban white people who, from what I've been told, feel that they've lost their culture and that they don't have any meaning in their lives. But yeah, so I just wanted to provide that as an example as well. Wondered your thoughts.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, these are complicated issues. So I guess I'll just go ahead and comply. As Rodney King stated, can't we all just get along? I'm not going to completely comply because I did put this question up to our listening audience. We have a good sized listening audience. Maybe someone, one, two, or three, Mombera, I see is in the house, talking about the globalist population control scheme at work. But I put up the question, is the quote, sissification, unquote, of males within the aggressive Western nations good for Pan-African competition in game theory? Question mark. So I put up that question. I'm not willing to let go of that position that the decline of social patterns that sustain hegemony on the part of the most aggressive ones on the planet, the decline of those social values should be to our advantage. I understand the point you're making, Brother Junius, that the bleed over
Hmm.
from these degenerate behaviors into our people is unacceptable. Yet then again, we have to understand that if this bleed over is confined to these Western nations in which we've been domiciled, well, in actuality, African Americans have not been contributing much at all, anyways, to the advance of sovereign and sustainable Pan African development.
But
But you got to understand that any pushback that we had, any resistance we had, intensified the push of Urugu to. I mean, it's almost like they become incensed if we fight back and when we fight back. That's why they hate the Haitians, because they
mhm,
actually had the
yeah.
audacity to fight back and win.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, and I'm not saying this to suggest that we stop and that we just lay down and roll over. I'm just saying that this is a multi-generational assault, and the thing that the Urugu has in his favor is the technology, because we
Hmm.
have embraced the technology. It is the Trojan horses, and you look at the media, and they talk about media consumption. What group leads media consumption? Unfortunately, we're at near the top, if not at the very top.
Yeah, if
Well, I would say this whole incel evolution is a global phenomena, and that's consumption of social media. I do, I can't disagree about the consumption of television and commercials and the values that they transmit, that Afro Amers are disproportionately affected. I can't deny that at all.
one other point that I had is that I believe that gender confusion and LGBT is being lauded uh, upon our people more harshly than anybody else. And I'm wondering if that is part of this strategic plan for sexual orientation to trump racial and ethnic solidarity. And so, in that sense, I wonder as well, does that also blow up in our face? Because from what I'm seeing on the ground here, it just is an overwhelming amount of our young people who are really holding the flag, no pun intended, for alternative sexual orientations and LGBT, instead of reading about Marcus Garvey or Malcolm X or Ella Baker or Ida B. Wells Barnett. And so, yeah, that would be my other pushback, is that this thing is being used to erase our memories, if you will, for ethnic and racial solidarity towards the preference of championing the rights for alternative sexual orientations.
Well, keep in mind that we're in this country, we're a microcosm of our brethren on the continent.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we were subjected to enslavement, they were subjected to imperialism, colonialization, and neocolonialism. It's just that their embrace of technology has not penetrated to the level it has here amongst us. And they were able to reinforce their values more so than we have. And because keep in mind, Black folks in America were very, and I hate to use this word, well, instead of saying conservative, I'll say traditional. We still had remnants of our African tradition.
Right.
And they being the Urugu and the social engineers or social re-engineers have worked very assiduously and very pointedly and deliberately to break those down, just like they
Mm-hmm.
broke down our vaccine resistance during COVID. We were, as a group, were targeted much more ferociously than anybody else, even though there was a
That's
lot of
right.
advertisements and stuff like that. Our community was targeted, and at least in the Philadelphia area, they got people who sold out, or maybe they meant well. I don't know. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they meant well, and they gave them the reinforcement, the recognition, and reward to help bamboozle much more of our people into taking that shot.
Well, Dan, and we're going to begin to summarize the conversation. We did start a few minutes late, and pressing schedules are going to hit us all here shortly. But as a consequence of that buying in, quote, or buying in slash selling out, those people were punished, and those who complied with the compradors were punished. Isn't that true?
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
And we don't wish that kind of punishment on people, but that's what happens when you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition ain't the way. That's sacred instruction from Stevie Wonder. We have heard that again and again and again and again, and we still keep believing in things that we just fundamentally do not understand.
Yeah, but see, when you look at the phenomenon that you just mentioned, the pushback and the attempt to defend traditional values, that process was attacked. And so the people who were in the vanguard of attacking the invasion of this cultural imperialism were attacked by the perpetrators. And, one example would be COINTELPRO. But then within our community, they upped the ante in terms of the reward and the recognition for those who abandoned our traditional values, who became traitors. They became celebrities. And it's not just material gain or money or bank accounts. A lot of times it's just recognition. We always had what's her name, Millie Jackson. We always had a couple of those people within the genre of R&B and Black music. In fact, I don't know about you, but I grew up that's the devil's music, R&B, the blues, and so that's the devil's music. Well, look at what has happened. So instead of having a couple of Millie Jacksons and a couple of other people that I can't even remember offhand, now you have a whole slew and almost a whole genre of people like that. Missy Elliott and other folks I don't even know. So that, like you said, it's a very complex situation. It's not necessarily cut and dry, and where you can pigeonhole one thing. It's a plethora of things going on, and we just have to step up our game and understand the game theory. This is what's happening on the field.
That's right. That's right. Let's begin to get our closing comments in for today's broadcast. We've talked about a lot of different things. I was going to be bringing up a book that I just purchased today. When we talk about scientific futurism, I'm a strong advocate for that. And I just discovered this scholar from South Africa. His name is Chiseliditsi Marwala. His book, Closing the Gap, The Fourth Industrial Revolution in Africa, October 2020. And I've been watching this morning, I was watching several video interviews of him, and he reminds me a lot of my hero, my Heru, Dr. Callistus Juma, from the Scientific Futures from Kenya. He's an ancestor now. And it is good to see this younger man, he's younger than I am, Chiselidzi Marwala, stepping into this gap, becoming a very highly recognized and accomplishing scholar from the perspective of Pan-African scientific futurism. So I put up a link in the browser, put it up on my Facebook page. I highly encourage people to start reading books like this. This one is not that expensive. You can get it used for, well, it's about the same when you include the postage of getting it new. But we encourage our people to read these books by African scholars.
Ashe.
And also, the U.S. appointment, there were a couple of things going on here. The U.S. appointment just announced, or it's nominated, Biden nominates I-Corps leader to command the U.S. Forces Korea. One of our viewers in South Korea, sent me this article from Stars and Stripes, dated September 4th. His name is Army Lieutenant General Xavier Brunson, nominee to command U.S. Special Forces Korea, a triple-hatted position that includes leading the combined forces and the United Nations commands. And if he is approved by the Senate, I think the Senate approves this one, he would also pin on the 4th star of a full general. I don't know if that means anything. I don't necessarily take pride in Buffalo Soldiers.
Mm.
Neither do I, especially at this day and time. I mean, in the past, we had choices. Some people felt that if they participated, that was their way. They could convince Urugu that we were equal to them, or some, in the case of the war between the states, they actually embraced it as a way to fight for their own freedom, because that was something that we embraced, not Abraham Lincoln.
That's right. And previously, Brunson had led the 7th Infantry Division in Operation Inherent Resolve, the decade-old fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And we do know from our examination that those were illegitimate operations, not welcomed by the Syrian government, the democratically elected government of Syria.
Yeah, but I mean, it's something that our people have to think about and examine for themselves. Some people are put in a situation where the military is a viable option in terms of their life choices and things like that. Me, nah.
And this Lieutenant General Xavier Brunson is being put into a position, and one of the photographs announced in this article illustrates that, shows him giving awards to Japanese commanders for exercises. And to me, they're being tasked with promoting globalism in an era when the U.S. empire is firmly in retreat. So it's like the empire's in retreat, U.S. military is up against the strictest or the greatest resistance ever. Quick, call Skillet and tell him to lead the forces.
Not only that, if what you say is look at look at what happened after World War II. The
Hmm.
United States went in, they wrote the Japanese Constitution. Japan became a vassal of the United States, but up until recently, they forbade them to even have a military. And
That's
so,
right.
like you said, because the empire is in decline, they need vassals, so they're allowing the Japanese to expand their military capabilities as a like a hedge in the region against China.
Now, how? What could we imagine is a thought within the minds of these Japanese commanders seeing a African American being appointed their titular commander in the larger scale? Do you think they might somehow want to resent that?
Not if they've been cultivated and trained and brought up the chain to accept
Hmm.
American hegemony.
Yeah, I I don't have a lot of extra emotions to involve engage in this, but this is it's kind of perplexing. Again, this is the burden of examining everything in the world that happens from a distinctly sovereign Pan-African perspective. We got to question game theory. We got to question the strategies, tactics, and motivations of all of the players in this game that I am calling the new scramble for Africa.
Right. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today before we leave. This is you can find this article in a Zero Hedge in today. China building factories throughout Africa to manufacture electric vehicles.
Yeah.
China will have access to African cobalt, copper, iron, lithium, and they're specifically targeting South Africa, Kenya, Guinea, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and the
Yeah, that's
Democratic
a
Republic
major story.
of Congo.
Yeah, I saw
Yep.
that.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a major story because right now it appears that China's strategy is to become the leading producer of EVs in the new era. And they are almost producing half of all the world's electric vehicles at this point.
And it's funny, reading Zero Hedge is really, it has evolved into something else, but it originally was an economic website.
Mm.
So you can read
Hmm.
between the lines. They're whining about subsidies that the Chinese government pays to their manufacturers, and they're saying it's given an unfair advantage. And to me, this is preposterous because Urugu doesn't want fair trade; he wants monopoly. That's
Mm.
their major function is to control everything. So, but it's news, but we need to look at it from the perspective of who's reporting.
One other story at Zero Heads I just seen from September 15, that's dated today. Large student loan servicer banned from service, ordered to pay $120 million settlement. Navient was accused of steering student loan borrowers into costly repayment options, depriving them of more affordable, income driven repayment plans. Will that impact the November contest between the blue team and the red team?
Now, because Zero Hedge is really a marginal type website, the vast majority of Black people don't go there, and they don't. To my understanding, the people I talk to, most of them are unfamiliar with it. And if you look at what's going on, because I was hoping that we would talk about the uh, so-called debate, but this election is being managed, and like all of them are, but this one is being managed to the point that people, it's a farce, really.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
before we go, I wanted to another important. Du- 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 oh, this might shake up some Black folks, some Negroes. The U.S. supports 2 permanent seats for African nations in the UN Security Council, and you can
Yeah, it
find
was
that at
proposed by the Biden
AP.
administration.
That's what I'm saying. So this might
hmm
shake up some black folks and get them to march in line and pull a lever for Kamala Harris.
That they are proposing Nigeria be one of the ones, but they are also saying 2 seats for a continental population of 1.521 billion people, but no veto power. Britain will retain veto power. France retain veto power. Russia, China, America are the only ones that can veto anything coming out of the UN Security Council. So Nigeria and the African continent outpopulating them, no veto power. It's just a style with no substance proposal, isn't it?
You're muted, Bo.
The UN has long been a globalist bastion.
Mm-hmm.
The nationalist right wingers claim that upon its founding, and it got to the point in the beginning they used to deny it. Then the Rockefeller said, "Yeah, it is. So what? What you gonna do about it?" And
Mm-hmm.
so again, it's the same old, same old. They do not
Same old,
want.
same old.
Yeah. Mhm.
Let's begin to wrap it up. Let's get a final statement from each of us before we wrap it up.
I will say that for us to think about becoming citizen journalists, and by that I mean being aware of what is going on locally and getting involved locally. One of the things that I've been advocating the last month or so since I discovered it is the pyramidofpower.net,
Mm-hmm.
which is a 17-part documentary series on a lot of these shadowy cabal going ons, but done in a very succinct and very well researched way. The investigative journalism of Derek Bros. So, share that, disseminate that, share and disseminate the LIB radio programs, as well as Baba Junius's articles and Baba Kiti's books. Each one of us have a duty at this point, having been blessed with the privilege of consciousness, which it seems like in these days and times is a privilege. Each and every one of us has the ancestral duty, the ancestral obligation to share with our friends and family this information, which is being highly censored, highly redacted, and being labeled misinformation. And so by sharing that and being a messenger, we can hope to bring Ma'at and the truth and Ubuntu to more of us. Ashe.
Ashe,
And I want
ashe.
to dovetail on what you just said and add the word righteous citizen journalists or reporters as opposed to corporatists or corporate owned or a lot of things that you see in the NABJ or some groups, similar groups like that, because they, in my view, have lost much of their integrity over the years since the organization was founded.
Ashe. Thank you.
All right. We are here at the end of today's broadcast. I want to thank you, brothers, for tuning in, for contributing as you do, we do here on LIB Radio. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you every week. And on that note, I want to thank you all for tuning in. You've been tuned into your favorite. We aim to be your favorite. We are LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. Tell your friends to tell their friends. We have our own here at LIB Radio. And I encourage people, we get our biggest audience on Sundays, no doubt. But I encourage people to check back throughout the week and look at the new programs that we add here every day. There is a method to our madness here. And what we are striving to do, what we're striving to create, literally can change the world, beginning with our homes, our families, and our communities first. I'm starting with the man in the mirror, and we are starting with his people, this beautiful Pan-African family in the mirror. on your favorite. We aim to be your favorite. We are LIB Radio, LIB TV. We are livinginblack.com. Peace and prosperity to each and every one of you.